Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson. We're having a conversation about what happened last week when the Boeing Starliner made a safe return to Earth.
Sans crew.
Sans crew. It's funny, I mean, safe is often seen binary yes or no. It is safe or it's not safe, but based on its outcome, which it's not. For example, Russian roulette, 5 times out of 6 on average is safe if the outcome is good. Mm-hmm. But of course, we're talking about Russian roulette where we have a revolver which has essentially a chamber which allows 6 rounds to be spun in the barrel. And so the idea is that you put 1 round in the barrel, not the barrel. What's the word What's the word I'm looking for?
Chamber.
The chamber for the revolver, and you spin it, and then it's going to randomly. It's a 1 in 6 chance that.
Now we don't recommend you try this game.
We're not advocating for it.
No. It's not a good game to play. You don't want to be involved with that.
No, but there's still a 5 in 6 chance that if you pull the trigger, you'll be okay.
Yep.
But if you pull the trigger and you're okay, was it still a safe thing to do? And the answer is obviously not. And so the issue was that Boeing Starliner was able to return to Earth without the crew because NASA initially decided that it was not safe to do so. And the fact that it's now done it safely, or we use the word safe to describe what actually happened, is very confusing semantically. But
yeah. Well, it's more, we got to get a hold of Greg Hutchins on this. It's more of the risk management. They're saying the level of risk for the crew is unacceptable. So we're not going to bring them back in that. And if they would have made that decision to go, well, there's an elevated risk, yet we'll bring the crew back, and something bad happened and we lost the crew, then they would be chastised for not recognizing the risk profile that was obviously there. And it's like, you have to make the decision before you get back to Earth. and so they did. And that's where we're at now. Space travel is a risky business in general. And NASA spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What got us into this scenario? You wrote about it last week in an article about yet another thing with Boeing not working out very well. Yet it was more of a comparison. Why is the SpaceX systems, they're doing hundreds of launches a year. I just saw a deal where one of their rockets, it landed safely like for the 18th time.
Right.
And they had one that failed recently, and there's an investigation for 2 days, and then they're off launching and successfully landing again.
Right.
And it's like, I think they got it down. There's a difference in how they went about doing it. I think that was the gist of your article.
Well, I think that with Boeing and lots of other big bloated contracting organizations, there's a fundamental strategy that has been forgotten about. For example, Jack Welch famously said shareholder value is the dumbest idea in the world. And the reason why he's saying that was because when you focus on shareholder value, you start focusing on making money. And MBA graduates and business owners across the world say, well, isn't that what you should be doing? Focusing on making money? Well, yes, but you focus on doing what you do well in a way that makes money. So Boeing was an organization back in the day, which is all about aircraft. And yes, it had a pretty substantial role in the Apollo program, for example, because at that time, aeronautics was essentially evolving, or at least included, where you push the boundaries out a little bit further, space travel and space exploration. But now Boeing doesn't do that anymore. Boeing has become a company which is all about making money, which is all about trying to, as opposed to making planes better than other competitors, trying to solidify its market share through frivolous lawsuits that try and push other players out of the market by trying to screw down the prices on suppliers by extraordinary amounts, which leads to disastrous drops in quality because physics
Yeah.
has a bunch of laws. Whereas you look at SpaceX, it has a term space in its title. It was a company set up by Elon Musk, and its mission was to become good at making rockets and spacecraft. That's it. And whereas Boeing now is if you look at what Boeing does, it's an extraordinary range of services. It supports armored vehicle stuff and things like that across the world. It's not its core business. And so what has happened recently when NASA Auditor General or Inspector General has essentially looked at what Boeing does and says, you know what, for the bunch of people you've got, we've contracted you to oversee, make the Starliner crew module and certain parts for the Space Launch System, which is a really big rocket system. You don't. There are quite a few issues that the Inspector General found. Number one was you don't have enough people. Number two is of those people, they're not qualified. And number three is, well, all the things we come and say we have problems with, you don't really respond, which is usually what happens when you don't know what you're doing. And so essentially, the long-winded preamble to the conclusion we're about to make is essentially Boeing doesn't know how to do space stuff, but won a contract from NASA and then started trying to build the human capability to do it. SpaceX, on the other hand, said, hey, we're going to build the human capability. We're going to do it in a very different way. We're going to test to learn, not test to fail, which is why they had all those relatively spectacular but early failures during launches.
Mm-hmm.
But they were very open, say, hey, that's cool. We did this to learn. And as opposed to shock horror across the world, people went, oh, okay, we've explained it. All right, off you go. And
Yep.
lo and behold, or if you look at the crew modules in particular, the Starliner is essentially the only reason it exists is because NASA wants to have two suppliers for these crew modules. So SpaceX has already got theirs done, got two variants, have done several launches, are reusable. And this is supposed to have been and the Boeing Starliner is now very, very late, very behind budget, and it still hasn't completed a successful mission. Whereas the SpaceX ones have done it several times over, and it just goes to show what is happening in so many big organizations, the Boeings, the Lockheed Martins, those big defense contractors, is they win a contract and then try to start building the human capital or human capability to make stuff work. But it doesn't work like that because you don't have a culture. You're not attracting people around a central idea. You're treating people like sheep and saying, "Okay, you're an engineer now. You go do this." You don't have the ability to think outside the box. You go back to what you think everyone should be doing. You don't have the confidence to think through problems, and it's essentially you go through this very formulaic approach to making stuff work, where everyone's scared. We just talked previously about comfort zones. But everyone's
Mm-hmm.
scared to be the person that pushes budget and schedule behind. And so they don't try and uncover failures. And so we just meddle along until we have this supposedly working prototype, which doesn't work at all. While a competitor, which started decades after Boeing was involved with the Apollo program, is now clearly an order of magnitude at least more capable of building, maintaining, looking after spacecraft. And so I just think it's a cogent point because especially military and the government customers who have long since atrophied their own engineering capabilities, well, they are now caught up with these people. They are caught up with these huge organizations which make them feel comfortable because of their historical prestige. But when they sign a dotted line, they often get substandard equipment 10 years after they're supposed to have got it, 3 times the price.
Yeah. Well, it's not isolated just to aerospace either.
No.
It's I'm thinking of the comparison of Tesla and GM, and it's we're going to start from the ground up. We're not going to follow all the rules that, and I'm using air quotes here, of how to build a car. And yeah, they ran into things they had to learn, and they, motored on, and no pun intended. They just said, well, yeah, we're learning. And they have novel suspensions. The Tesla folks have novel suspension systems and drivetrains and all kinds of stuff that there is absolutely no reason that GM couldn't have done it. It's just that it's that culture, and we're not making money fast enough in this. Tesla went for what, 10, 15 years without making a profit. It still got more and more money, and more people saw the vision and the focus of it. They were there to make electric cars. That's what they did. Whereas GM is making all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And and it was like, well, Sarah, your division's not making money yet, so you're fired. Well, they kind of lost. And what baffles me is, way back when, geez, almost 30 years ago, I saw a really cool looking GM all electric vehicle, and I think it was called EV1. And I think they built a couple of hundred of them. They demoed them around, and nobody bought them for all kinds of reasons. And then they canned the whole program, scrapped the whole division, and said, we're not doing electric vehicles, until basically they got forced to by the likes of Tesla and others. It just baffles me, is that short-term vision, as you were talking about in our last episode, of, we're doing it for shareholder value, is, well, yeah, it's a balance. But if you lose your ability to innovate or create markets and do interesting things and have that focus for it, well, then you're probably not going to make it much shareholder value in the long run. And so it's not isolated just to the aerospace industry, but
No.
wasn't it the early aerospace industries? I don't know if Lockheed Martin, and before they got together, or these other guys, were they creating experimental aircraft on their own, or did they have a contract first to go do it?
Well, don't forget they're all born out of World War II, where it has a very different culture
Yeah, there was a lot of money
as
being
well.
dropped into programs. Yeah.
Right, but the whole idea was that, and to be honest, Boeing goes way back to World War One, but
Mm-hmm.
it was essentially it is all about planes, because planes starting to come into play, and Boeing started when they out of Seattle, I believe. Is Seattle
Yep.
the right
Yeah, there's
place?
Seattle. Yeah.
And I believe it was around the seaplanes as well. It
Mm-hmm.
was all about, as anyone who's been in the northwestern part of North America knows, that you often need to be able to travel into really weird places, where the only places you can land are on bodies of water.
Yeah, it's the only flat surface around.
It's right, but there is an impetus behind uh, be, be, behind that business model. We're going to essentially create seaplanes um, in order to create different ways of transporting goods and people throughout northwestern America. And that's where Boeing started. And of course, then they became a regular producer of airplanes, which then allowed them to branch out into different areas. And I don't even think it was called Boeing. It might have been called like Pacific Aero Products or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was founded by William Boeing. But anyway, they started to be able to not only build their own airplanes, but after World War One, there was a surplus of military planes coming into the airplane market as well. And so that sort of pushed them back a little bit. And to be fair, Boeing did start building a lot of other things, including furniture, while those planes started hitting the market. But it was never trying to. It always was a plane manufacturer, when they started getting on top of their flying boats and all the rest, um, they were able to then start being able to get back to the core business of building airplanes. And of course, as the decades wore on, they need more better planes. And so Boeing was able to start saying, hey, we can start building some fighters, and off we went.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it always was an aircraft company. That's what it was. It's all about trying to make planes, and when you had the ability to leverage on expertise you built, focusing on a particular problem, that is transporting goods and people around different difficult locations in Northwest and North America. That's your raison d'etre. That's SpaceX's mission, was to create, reusable rockets to do different things. And off we
And make
go.
it affordable. Well, I do remember growing up, one of my uncles that lives up in the Seattle area was told the story of working on the heat shield for the Apollo capsules for when it came back into the atmosphere. And they had material scientists. They had a big group of folks that were just material scientist type people. And so the NASA folks or space agencies tapped into that expertise. And they had the capital, they had the know-how, they had the ability to deal with this thing. Because I think part of that team was working on supersonic aircraft, and the amount of heat that builds up on the surface of the fuselage is incredible. And so they were looking at different materials and ways to transfer heat and so on. And so it seemed like a natural step, and successfully so, to tap into that brain trust to say, well, how do we come back in through the atmosphere and survive it? So help us sort that out. And so my uncle got to be involved with that. And I remember in college, I thought at that time the dream job would have been to go to Bell Labs, because nominally they were a phone company, but they were doing space exploration. They were doing, all kinds of high end mathematics and weird stuff. And they had truly a research lab. And there's different budgets and projects and stuff they worked on, but it was stuff that you were like, how is listening to the cosmos ever going to um, be commercialized? Ended up getting Nobel Prizes, but it wasn't ever a product anywhere. But they were making advances in signal integrity and measurement systems and all kinds of other things along the way that did get capitalized. And you look at NASA, a lot of people say, well, we spent billions getting to the moon. This is, yeah, and we got Velcro. And hundreds of other things we don't even think of anymore, but they were revolutionary at the time because they were chartered with doing something impossible, landing a rocket and reusing it. Everybody thought Musk and his SpaceX crew were crazy until they did it. Whereas Boeing was going to do tried and true stuff, stick to the simple, to the proven things, take no risks, all those kinds of things. I don't know. It's also part of their culture is of, who is it? Xerox. They came up with like the first, was it Xerox? The part research lab in Palo Alto. I think it was a Xerox lab, invented personal computers and a mouse, and kind of said, well, you can have it, Steve. We don't see any market for this. You can have it. We're not going to do computers. That's not going to happen. That's not a thing. We do cameras. That's where our money is, with film, by the way.
Right.
No, it wasn't that's Xerox. It wasn't Xerox. It was Kodak.
You're talking about Kodak.
Kodak, yeah.
So Kodak actually, one of their employees in the 1970s was the first one to develop the ability to essentially take digital images. And he got a patent, but Kodak got a patent and sat on it. It did nothing because they were comfortable with film. It was, and they were good at film until there was no need for film.
Yeah. Jeez.
It's crazy.
What's the
Sorry.
latest the latest phones now are like 50 megapixels thing. You could take a snap a shot on your phone and you could have very high resolution quality of it at a billboard size of printing. It's staggering how far that digital imagery went. Initially, they were pretty much grainy black and white images. Um, Film was far superior, yet it only took them a decade to just basically wipe out the film industry, film cameras.
But that's an example of how, yeah, it's are you there to make money or are you there to win? Are you there to do stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Then the reality is that we're still sitting here Boeing and SpaceX are making, you know, great comparisons for this conversation. Boeing has received more money. Boeing has is
They were being cheered on by NASA because they really wanted the second deal. And we didn't mention Blue Horizon. Are they still a thing?
you mean Blue
Or
Origin?
Blue Origin? Yeah, Blue Origin. And what's the other one? There was I think there were four billionaires that were trying to get in on this business. Yet you don't hear about Blue Origin anymore. I'm not even sure
No,
they
you do.
exist.
They're doing it. They're doing stuff. They're a bit quieter. I mean, they are they they're more out there than you might think.
Hmm.
But so one of the other reasons that people know more about SpaceX, they were done earlier, and of course, there's this guy called Elon Musk who's, you know, quite
He
vociferous.
don't need no marketing agency apparently.
No, but don't forget, we're looking at you look at Tesla. They're not what they used to be. Then they are no longer the leading seller of EVs in Europe, and they once were.
Yep.
It was close. Sorry, it wasn't close. Um,
Yeah,
so
they also were basically single-handedly created the market. Even though other people have tried and different have come and go, it was that single purposeness and vision of that organization that really drove it. Having serious competition was, I guess, not part of the business plan.
well, they stopped being Tesla, I'd argue. They stopped being Tesla-ish.
Yeah.
They started doing the things that make, that suited them. But uh, there's a lot of things you can look at and what Tesla's gone wrong, but what's going on with Tesla. But let's not forget that you have the CEO who is now the CEO of SpaceX, Tesla, um, Twitter or X.
X.
That takes a toll.
Isn't there a mining company too? Boring.
Yeah, the Boring Company.
Yeah.
So that's all well and good, but we know where Elon's spending most of his time, and so I don't think anyone has any doubt that is affecting the profitability of Tesla. You
Yeah.
don't have that when he had that single-minded. I'm going to show everyone. You could tell in the way he was communicating when Tesla was up and coming and starting to do really, really cool things that he was there with a bit of a screw you mindset. You don't get that anymore when he's talking about Tesla. It's all, okay, how do we cut costs? How we do? Okay, so now you revert, and all of a sudden these other players, BMW is now the biggest seller of electronic vehicles in Europe, and that should never happen. Tesla was so far ahead of BMW that you should never have relinquished that lead, and they have.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
issue is that it might now extend to SpaceX, but you could also argue that SpaceX is a little bit insulated and it is a little bit simpler in its business plan. It's got a very clear customer. It's got um, it's got a clear way of making money as opposed to Tesla, which you might say a clear way of making money. You just build cars, sell cars. But when things get muddied and when you have competitors saying, hey, we could do that too, then all of a sudden you got to start thinking on your feet, start being, taking that ruthless streak you had previously and start adapting it to the new market, the new industry. But if you're off, trying to change the world through social media by buying all the social media and they're not stopping talking about it, you just stagnate. You just stand still. You mark time.
Yeah.
Whereas you haven't had that transition point for SpaceX, which would be a huge strategic risk. Let's not forget that some of the backers, the financial backers that helped Elon Musk by Twitter, now X, their own reports say, hey, the value of Twitter has reduced by about 73% since he took over.
Yeah. This
It's
hasn't
not
been a
doing
good
well.
investment. Not a good investment.
No,
Yeah, they're pushing
it's
back
not
on
doing
it.
well.
Yeah. No, it's with the comparison of SpaceX to the Starliner program illustrates that basic concept of you got to have a good solid vision and goal, and you also have to pay attention to the details, and in the culture of the organizations makes a huge difference of how things work. It's a bit outside of the reliability part, but you can consider Starliner, it failed its mission. It didn't bring the crew back. It didn't accomplish its mission as it set out to start. Yeah, they might have learned a few things along the way. Yet that wasn't the point of the mission. It was to take a crew to space and bring them back. And they didn't. Will they get another chance? I don't know. That's going to be left to the lawyers and contracts, and how desperate NASA wants a second source. But the idea is that if you're in an innovative culture and a clear purpose, sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's as frustrating as you can get. It kind of depends on how aligned are you with what they're trying to do. From a reliability point of view, is the culture, the thing that stands out to me is SpaceX spectacularly failed and learned an amazing amount, and very quickly, over a span of just a couple of years, learned how to land rockets and been able to show it ever since, with rare exceptions, for how complex and dangerous that process is. And it's just part of the culture. Let's figure it out and go. And so, the end of the day, they weren't focusing on reliability or not failing at all. They were focused on failing and learning and taking rational risks. They didn't have crews in those first one. What was the recent one? They had the great big huge rocket that they've been launching recently. It went up like 8 seconds, its first flight, and blew up. And then the next one, it went a minute and a half and it blew up. And then another one did everything good, got to orbit, and then came back and burned up on it reentry. And they're like, oh, all of those were successes. They learned what they wanted to learn. They learned tons of stuff and new stuff. And now they just launch and land and having a great old time.
Right. But that's all about culture, isn't it? Yeah. That's where it comes back to, what is it you're trying to do? So I suppose the main point is, essentially, Boeing was trying to sell a product which didn't exist. And the product was their ability to do space stuff. Yep. Said, okay, won the contract. Now let's get the people. And once you have the people, that's when you have a culture, whether it's a good culture, bad culture, or anything in between. And so you can't just create a positive culture overnight. You can't just say, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we do things here. And especially when the bosses themselves are just as inexperienced as anybody else at doing this stuff, and they are as
well. They also bring along the baggage of, well, if our airplanes have one minor fault in it, it's really, really, really bad news. So we designed the spacecraft so it never fails. You don't launch it if it's going to fail. And so it imposes a culture of take no risks and don't tell me about problems, kind of thing. But that might be right, and subject for a whole nother episode.
Absolutely.
That culture part of it. Anyway, it's the recent news has always been good fodder for our discussions, Chris. But I really like getting more questions and comments and feedback and stuff. So I'll once again try to ask and see if we can scare up a few more topics and concepts and ideas and stuff. What's on our listeners' minds. So I think all of you know what I'm going to say, so I'll just skip it this time. Just send over your comments and questions. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, Chris, I think, I did a change first time in 1,000 episodes, and it's possible. We'll see what happens.
That's growth.
It took me long enough. Huh? All right, Chris. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, Fred. Always a pleasure.
Right. There we go. Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.